Hi there! This video shows the assembly of a 2-box bike. Where it differs in a 4-box format, we will highlight it using this icon. This is Peter, brand specialist at Urban Arrow. He'll guide you throughout this video. That way you can deliver the Urban Arrow to your client in perfect condition. There are 2 ways you can receive an Urban Arrow family once you place your order. Essentially, they are the same bike. Here you see the 2-box pallet. The small box contains the pre-assembled rear frame, handlebar and components package. The big box contains the front frame, EPP box, protection tube, fork and front wheel, bench, steering rod. The package with all the components is enclosed in the same box as the rear frame. The components package contains an Urban Arrow family user manual, Bosch charger and charger cable, Bosch Intuvia display, cable wrap, tie wraps, elastic damper for steering rod, front fork shimmy damper, headset cover plate, frame shims, pedal set, rear mudguard flap, ding-dong bell. If you received your order in the 4-box pallet format, the EPP box and rear bench are added separately. We'll continue to highlight what this means for the different steps in the assembly process during this video. The package with all the components is enclosed in the same box as the front frame. If you ordered a bike with a Bosch Performance or Cargo Line motor, then the Intuvia display will also be in the components package. Okay, let's build this beauty. Unbox the front frame to prepare the bike for assembly. For now, you can park the bench, steering tube and front wheel assembly to the side. We'll use them later. Before starting to work on the bike, tighten the kickstand for maximum stability during the process. To be able to install the fork and shimmy damper plate, you must first remove the protection tube and EPP box. If your bike came in 4 boxes, then you won't need to remove the protection tube as it arrives disassembled. When removing the front bolts of the protection tube, you'll want to pay attention to the black washers located between the front frame and the protection tube. Remove the protection tube. Wiggle the EPP box and remove it from the frame. Grab the fork and dismount the headset. Note that the bottom part of the headset is already in the frame. While dismounting the headset, pay close attention to the order of the rings, because you'll need to reassemble them in the same order later. This is the correct order. Also note that the compression rings of the headset have a cone-shaped side and a flat side. On the bottom of the fork, the cone-shaped side faces upwards and the orientation of the bearing should correspond with that of the compression ring. Before we insert the fork, we install the shimmy damper plate. You'll find the shimmy damper plate in the components package. Note that the damper plate has an indentation for a bolt. To make for easier installation, apply a bit of assembly paste to the front of the shimmy damper plate. This will make it stick to the bolt. Now insert the damper plate into the head tube of the front frame. The bolt should fall neatly into the indentation, and make sure it sticks in the right place. Take the pre-assembled fork and slide it through the frame. The damper plate should remain in exactly the same place. To complete the installation of the damper plate, slide on the bearing, compression ring, washer, top cover, clamp, and top bolt cap. Eliminate play by turning the top bolt cap until you feel some resistance. Check by pulling back and forth on the fork blades. After fastening the top bolt, you may secure both clamp bolts alternately to 6 Nm. Once the fork is in place, dial in the M6 bolt to get the right amount of damping. You should feel the effect, but it shouldn't inhibit free steering. Before removing the rear frame from the box, apply some assembly paste to the star nut and the inside of the stem. This prevents future creaking. Then, cut the tie wrap and mount the handlebars roughly in position. While doing this, be careful not to twist any of the cables and especially mind the hydraulic ones. Lightly tighten the top bolt before fully unboxing the rear frame. Lift the rear frame onto the workbench and use a small trestle to balance it. Now you can further tighten the top bolt until you feel a resistance. Once you do, check the orientation of the steering head. When aligned properly, the wide angle of the steering head triangle below should point forwards in the riding direction. When you're satisfied with the alignment, tighten the stem's clamp bolt to the specified torque of 13 to 15 Nm. To complete the steering installation, adjust the angle of the stem and the handlebar as desired. Lastly, tighten the bolt to 18 Nm. Pay attention that this is 6 Nm higher than the stem specification. If it is necessary to close unwanted gaps between the front and rear frame, you'll find some shims in the box with parts. If you find them, use them. If they're not present in the box, then you don't need them. In this example, the bike doesn't need any shims, so when properly balanced, you can go ahead and connect the front and rear frame with 4 M10 bolts. A medium strength thread lock is needed for these bolts. Use the lowest bolt option and make sure you use the correct fitting Allen key. Last step is to tighten the bolts to a torque of 26 Nm using the torque wrench with Allen key 6. You'll need to guide the entire cable bundle underneath the frame towards the front. Use tie wraps to secure it in place. Don't tighten these completely, as you'll want some flexibility here later. To install the caliper, make some space to work and dismount the mudguard stay by removing the bolt. From the cable bundle, grab the brake cable with the pre-assembled caliper. Then remove the plastic brake pad spacer and carefully place the caliper over the disc rotor and line up the holes with those in the fork. Connect the caliper to the fork using the M6 bolts. To center the pads on the rotor, squeeze the brake and keep it there using a sufficiently strong rubber band. Then, alternately, tighten the bolts and verify whether the disc runs freely and is not touching the brake pads. If it is touching the brake pads, readjust the caliper. To complete the installation of the disc brake, reconnect the mudguard stay. You're almost halfway. Keep pushing!
Defending Olympic champion, can he break the world record? Yes, he can!
What a lift! Brilliant extension.
To prepare the horizontal steering tube for installation, make sure the ball joints are turned clockwise until almost no thread is visible. Slide the steering tube into the guide located under the right-hand side of the frame and connect it to the steering head triangle using the outermost hole. Use the washers as follows: 1 on top, 2 in the middle, and a small and large one on the bottom. Tighten the bolt firmly. Now connect the steering tube to the fork. Place the spacers on each side of the ball joint. Insert the bolt into the fork and use the washer underneath the connection lip, between it and the lock nut. Now you can tighten both lock nuts of the steering tube. When installed correctly, the steering tube shouldn't touch the frame when moving the steering from left to right. If it does touch the frame, loosen the lock nuts and readjust the ball joint. The orientation of the ball joint should be horizontal to slightly off-center. It doesn't touch the fork mount during steering. The models with Bosch Active Plus and Performance motors both have the Lezine Mini E65 headlight. The models with a Bosch Cargo Line motor come with a Lezine Power E115 headlight. Both can be connected as follows. Take the cable from the front wheel and guide it back, underneath the bike, towards the rear. Make sure to stay clear of the kickstand. Now you can take out the covering strip from the frame tube. Take the motor cable out of the frame tube. Now you can use the cable tool to guide the cable through the frame. Position the tool parallel to the frame tube and insert as shown. Place the light cable connector into the tool. Make sure to have the protruding part face upwards as you pull back the tool slowly. Use your free hand to push the cable towards the rear. Lubricate if necessary. Make the connection. Mount the display and, by turning the light on and off a couple of times, verify whether or not a proper connection has been made. Take the cable wrap from the box with parts and wrap it around the light and brake cables. The cable bundle should be able to move with the steering unobstructed. Make sure it moves freely and tighten the last tie wrap. Place the cables back into the frame tube and reinstall the covering strip. To dampen velocity vibrations, you'll need the elastic damper. Wrap it around the steering rod about 25 centimeters away from the bend. Pro tip: at this point, spray the damper with a bit of brake cleaner and then pull firmly. Stretch it and place the other end around the steering tube elastic socket. Once the damper is in place, tighten the elastic socket bolt with an Allen key 4 and a cap wrench 8. Note that when moving the steering in both directions, the elastic damper should not touch the steering tube's guide bracket or the frame. When you get the placement right, apply a tie wrap around the elastic damper to fix it in place. Unscrew the M6 bolts from the rear frame. Also unscrew the bolts of the rear bench at this point. Now it is time to remount the EPP box. Put the box in place and nudge it into its final position. To keep the foam box in position, you'll remount the protection tube. To complete the installation of the protection tube on the front of the bike, place the washers between the protection tube and the frame and use 2 greased M8 bolts to mount it. Do not yet tighten these bolts. Pro tip for the next step: sometimes a lashing strap can help to align the protection tube properly to the bike. Make sure there is some play in the front and that the strap pulls downwards and a bit to the rear. That way the M6 bolts can be mounted straight and free of stress. Use assembly paste for the M6 bolts that will connect the protection tube to the rear frame. Fasten these bolts in a cross pattern as shown in order to prevent deformation. Now you can go back to the front of the bike and fasten the M8 bolts to complete the protection tube assembly. If you need to assemble your own rear bench, then this is how to do it. You'll need an Allen key 4 to complete this sub-assembly. Note that the feet have a slight incline. The higher part should be mounted to the side where the belts are located. This will be the front side of the bench once you've moved it in the box. Now you'll install the rear bench. Position the bench and the bike so that the holes in the legs line up with those in the inside of the frame. Now, secure the bench with M6 bolts and washers up to 4 to 6 Nm. To complete the bench installation, you'll need to install the top part of the belt to the rear of the protection tube like this. Make sure that the straps are straight and line up with the bench part of the belt. To mount the headset cover, loosen the 2 M5 bolts in the front frame a couple of turns so the headset cover will fit. Adjust the cover to follow the shape of the box, and then tighten the bolts. Apply some assembly paste, and then use the pedal wrench to finish the job. When installing the pedals, make sure you fasten the left and right one in their proper place. Mount the ding-dong bell so that the client can press the bell lever with ease. If your Urban Arrow has an Intuvia display, then this is the time to connect it to the bike. If your bike has the Purion display, it will already be mounted on the handlebars, and you can connect the display to the computer and start the Bosch dealer software immediately. We pre-program the first service in 500 kilometers, and the language is set in English by default. Please set the language and time settings to your local standards. The mudguard flap comes in the box with parts. Once you've located it, you can deflate the rear tyre to make some space. To install, slide the flap over the mudguard and insert the black plastic bolt. Use the washer on the inside of the mudguard and finish the installation by applying pressure to the plastic bolt so it clicks into position. To guarantee this Urban Arrow family leaves your shop in perfect condition, you ought to perform these final checks before delivery. Verify that both front and rear discs run free from the brake pads. Shifter cable free play should be around 1 mm. Spoke tension. Speed sensor alignment. Check the cable routing going to the back wheel and verify that the cable isn't touching the wheel or disc rotor. Bicycle lock. Chain tension. While placing the battery, you should hear a click to ensure that the battery is locked in place. Check the bike computer and its functions. To unlock, turn the key and pull the battery backwards. Now you can place it in the charger so your client can leave your store on his new bike. The lights, tire pressure, and finally make sure all nuts and bolts around the bike are securely fastened. Please find all the Newton-meter specifications in the user manual. After all these checks, make sure you take the bike out for a ride yourself. While doing that, you can break in the brake pads. Last thing before delivery, loosen the kickstand bolts to achieve intended operation. Operating the kickstand should be as easy as 1, 2, 3. And that is your brand new Urban Arrow family bike, assembled and ready to roll.